Welcome everyone to the presentation of my MA thesis defense. I will give you a brief presentation of my MA thesis, which is called Ethical Grounds and Consequences of Cancel Culture, a philosophical investigation of online social punishment. Special thanks to my supervisor, Alfred Archer, and my second reader, Catherine Robb, for guiding me throughout this whole process. Well, if you know me, you will be familiar with this topic because I have stopped talking about it the past few months. But for those who are not familiar, I will give you some explanation and some examples of what cancel culture is and what #cancels means. It is a new online social phenomenon which includes attempts to denying a public figure privileged access to the public sphere. And this may sound rather difficult, but we are all familiar with cases of celebrities that have been cancelled. Think of Kevin Spacey after sexual assault allegations. Think of J.K. Rowling and her remarks on transgenders. Think of R. Kelly being cancelled after the documentaries about his sexual assault. But also Louis C.K., Justin Trudeau, and the list goes on and on and on. These are all celebrities that have been cancelled in one way or another for their wrongdoings. And these wrongdoings, as you heard, they can vary from harmful wrongdoings to major wrongdoings to more minor wrongdoings, which include racist slip of the tongue, some remarks that are not politically correct. There are many things that can be labeled as cancel culture, and I will refer to, for example, calling out, boycotting a person, condemning a person, but what they have in common is that they all aim at denying a certain public figure privileged access to the public sphere. The thesis I will be defending is that cancel culture as an effective form of online social punishment should be executed in an ethically justified way regarding both the canceller and the cancelled. In order to do so, I will give you an analysis of both the grounds and the consequences of cancel culture as I found in my research. Well, the overview, this is also the structure of my thesis. First, I will talk about online activism in the new public sphere. Then I will talk about cancel culture as a form of online social punishment. And lastly, I will talk about overcoming cancel culture and the possibilities of celebrity atonement. And then we will head towards a conclusion. Well, let's continue with the description of chapter 1. It is about online activism in the new public sphere. I start off with defining the public sphere as it has been done by several other philosophers. Think of Jürgen Habermas, think of Hannah Arendt. They both give a really elaborate description of the new public sphere, of the public sphere as in their times. And I will connect it to social media as a new public sphere in the time we live in now. What is interesting about the descriptions offered by Habermas and Arendt is that the public sphere is a place where people can get together and discuss societal topics. One of the main differences with their public sphere and this public sphere is that their public sphere was not accessible for everyone. It was mainly for intellectuals, for politicians, for important people, whereas social media is accessible for almost everyone, which results in people having a voice which haven't had a voice before in a public sphere. Think of minorities such as women, which came up for their rights in feminism, in online feminism, but also in the rise of #MeToo a few years ago, but also the Black Lives Matter movement has occurred this year, which results in a lot of real life societal changes. So the new public sphere allows for activism because it gives a voice to minorities that were not heard before. These are all quite positive developments, you would say, but there are also a lot of negative sides to online activism. There are a lot of objections. We can think of slacktivism, which is a mocking name for online activism, which means that you are not engaging in real activism, but sitting on your couch or behind your laptop, posting on Twitter or Facebook without doing really something in order to bring about social change. I also discuss moral grandstanding, which means that you not necessarily aim for moral change, but you want to show yourself as a morally respectable agent. It is not that you want to condemn a person because that you want them to do better, but you want to show others that you are morally respectable. So it is quite an egocentric endeavor, you could say. I end with the definition of cancel culture, which is also a form of this activism in the new public sphere. It aims at denying a public figure privileged access to the public sphere. So chapter 2 is on cancel culture as a form of online social punishment. Well, I first give a definition of social punishment, which is informal, non-legal social punishment. And I compare this with legal social punishment, because when punishment is discussed in the literature, it almost always focuses on legal punishment, and that is very different from social punishment as I am going to discuss it. A few things that are so different is the fact that legal punishment is guided by legal rules. It has restrictions, it has a hierarchical structure, it has authorities, it has institutional roles, and all of these aspects lack in online social punishment. And this is also one of the reasons that are many risks for social punishment, because it is not structured in any way. There are no rules for it, and there are no guidelines for engaging in social punishment. I then talk about the communicative approach towards social punishment, which is one of the important things in order to justify online social punishment. This connects to Rutzig's moral pressure theory, because a communicative approach focuses on what happens after social punishment, whereas, for example, the retributive approach focuses on merely the intrinsic value of punishing another one to get even with the wrongdoer. It is about the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle, whereas the communicative approach really aims for moral progress. It aims for allowing the wrongdoer to learn from his or her mistakes and to have some moral progress. And I think that if this aspect is present in our way of engaging in cancel culture, that it will justify it in some sense. Also, I discussed several objections towards cancel culture. I will not elaborate too long on this because I only have 10 minutes, but it is, for example, very difficult to determine what is wrong and what is right. When can you cancel someone? Can you cancel someone for a wrongdoing they did, for example, for 20 years ago? Or can you cancel someone for something they said when they were drunk? Something that they didn't mean? Can you cancel someone after they have had a change of heart, or they have learned new moral ideas? And all of these things could be objections to cancel culture. Also, what I said, because it is not guided by any rules, there is no stopping point for canceling a person, so the punishment can go on, and it can take disproportional measures. It also can bring about an accumulation of harmfulness. So there are many reasons to not engage with cancel culture. However, I will explain how we can engage in cancel culture. Well, what is also important is chapter 3, which focuses on the consequences, in a sense of that it focuses on overcoming cancel culture and celebrity atonement. Well, what I also briefly discussed in the second chapter is that cancel culture has a lack of opportunity for redemption. This is why I think that Rutzig's moral pressure theory is so important, because we have to keep in mind when punishing a person that we want better results, we want good consequences, and with merely punishing someone for retributive, bloodthirsty reasons, we will not get moral pressure. So it is important to keep this moral pressure and to keep these opportunity for moral progress in mind. And what is important for this is making amends. A wrongdoer should be able to make amends. So I discuss making amends in both a private sense and a public sense, because we are talking about public figures in a public sphere. And what I found is that it is really hard to properly make amends as a public figure. It is, for example, hard to determine whether their change of heart is sincere, or that they are saying that they're sorry because they want to save their reputation. It is hard to determine what kind of social public punishment is a good punishment. And also because it is a public relation, there are more parties involved. And this makes it also harder to determine who deserves apologies. In an interpersonal relation, you have the wrongdoer and the victim, but now you also have the following, the fans, the moral community, and all the institutions behind a famous person. So I explained that it is really difficult to make amends as a public person. However, I don't think it is impossible. You just have to work harder. And if you really want to make amends, it is possible for a public figure to properly atone. But we have to keep in mind that as counselors, we also have to give them the opportunity to properly make amends, and we have to be able to accept these amends if they are made in the right way. Then we are at the conclusion already. So there are many reasons not to engage in cancel culture, as many problems can occur. However, it is an effective form of social punishment that can be used when other forms of punishment are not sufficient. The justification of the use of cancel culture mainly lies in Rodsik's moral pressure theory, in avoiding the risks and accepting a proper public atonement. So if we look at the thesis, we can say that cancel culture as an effective form of online social punishment should be executed in an ethically justified way regarding both the canceller and the cancelled. En die tekst die eronder staat, die ga ik weghalen, want dat is allemaal herhaling. Are there any questions? Stop share.